you just do it, it turns out okay, even if you have scheduling and PC issues
Yep.
and totally have the wrong time zone in your head.
Yeah, sorry. Oh man. Yeah, that's my bad. I assumed you were Central Time. My bad.
So you're West Coast and Pacific time.
Yeah. It's only 4 p.m. here.
It is almost 7 p.m. here.
Whoops. My bad.
Which is
Rip.
not bad because this is the time I originally was going to start anyways. Before
Oh, yeah.
maybe
Whoops.
back for an hour, back an hour. But anyways, we're going back to a time we don't have to deal with computer issues. I'm not. I'm pretty sure we don't deal with it in the BC era.
Nope. Lucky bastards. Yeah. Uh, so I wanted to start off a little bit with something else because I saw a meme. I saw a meme, and
Okay.
it's related to this a little bit. It had, you know what Wojaks are?
Uh, sounds familiar, but not totally.
Oh, well, it had a Greek virgin Wojak going, no, you can't just steal Zeus from us. And there's a Chad Roman Wojak that's like, his name is Jupiter now.
Yeah.
Um, Common misconception. No, that's not what happened. The Romans didn't steal the Greek gods. They most definitely believed in Jupiter and Mars and all of them before they ever met the Greeks.
They just gave them their names, like, hey, these guys,
Yeah,
like a band together or something.
these guys are similar. They have similar traits, so we'll just uh we'll just apply the Greek stories onto these characters we already had. And the Romans did this earlier with the Etruscans as well.
Yeah.
Um, you actually,
But they got they named after planet. But they got the Roman god got their planets, and the Greek gods didn't.
yeah, uh, true. Um,
Otherwise, the planets would. What I think the planets would be Hermes, Aphrodite's, Gaia, Ares, Zeus, Kronos, Uranus, Poseidon, and Hades.
yeah, um, Uranus stays the same. Yeah, we actually have Romans who did s- quote unquote steal gods from different cultures, and they didn't change their names. They kept the names the same. Uh, for example, there's a Gallic god of horses that becomes like the mascot for the Roman cavalry called Epona. Um, she keeps her name. She doesn't get a new fancy Roman name. So this isn't Romans going, huh, I like your gods. I'm just going to change the name for some reason. It's your gods seem a little similar to my gods, and Greek culture's kind of cool. Let's just apply our gods to your gods. And they did that earlier with the Etruscan gods as well. So, yeah, it's 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 the other way around.
I'm glad deities are so flexible like that.
Yeah, true.
Uh,
Um,
but today, plus a few other ones, we're here talking about a war that a lot of people already know about. Well, they know the second one. Most people don't. I think most people don't know about the first and third one. The first and third of these things. They mostly concentrate on the second one.
We're gonna be talking about a bit more than just the Punic Wars, but yes, this is the big imperial struggle for Rome to become the sole power in the Mediterranean.
From a local power to a hey, we got these guys. We gotta keep an eye on these people.
Yeah, it's in the name. Rome becomes an empire, not in the sense that it's ruled by an emperor, but in the sense that it rules over an empire.
Uh,
So, last time we had Rome dominating central Italy and becoming the preeminent power in Italy. Uh, so now Rome decides that they're going to move into the south. The south is ruled by is inhabited by Greek city states that are around a bunch of locals, but the Greek city states are fiercely independent, as Greek city states always are.
and
Uh,
this is when they decided, hey, Greek people, we're gonna borrow your gods for our gods.
uh, yeah, it's a slow process, but yes, we do start seeing that. Though there are some issues because there are factions in the Roman society that do not like the Greeks. They see them as degenerate, but we'll talk about them.
That's funny uh, since the whole civilized slash barbarian thing on the Greek side, they thought the same thing.
Yeah, we'll talk about it a little bit more later as it's more important for the expansion of Rome. But yeah, not all the Romans were big fans of the Greeks at this time. That's but yeah. So there's this dude named Pyrrhus of Epirus. He's the king of Epirus. He's also the second cousin of Alexander the Great, and he um during Rome's conquests in central Italy, uh, the East kind of goes a little ham. Okay, this dude named Alexander the Great decides I'm gonna finish what my father was gonna do and conquer Persia. So he does, but through a combination of probably alcoholism and being in a swamp at Babylon, um, he dies early without an heir, and his empire kind of crumbles into
At
uh,
least two or three or four smaller kingdoms.
that solidifies a lot later. During this early time, it's just a giant um, brawl between people trying to reforge Alexander's empire, and then there's Ptolemy in Egypt who doesn't care about reforging Alexander's empire
Egypt,
and just wants Egypt because Egypt's really rich.
uh, the Ptolemy dynasty, the ones that the ones that made the Habsburgs look like not as you thought
Yeah,
the Habsburgs were inbred.
the Ptolemies decided to partake in the age-old Egyptian royalty uh, tradition of banging their sisters
Yeah,
instead of other people. Yeah,
I don't know what the word is, but they made the Habsburgs look normal.
yeah. At least the Habsburgs married cousins. Uh, but yeah, one of the kingdoms in Greece at this time that Greeks largely saw as a land of barbarians, but just like with Macedon earlier, these people saw themselves as Greeks, was Epirus. Um, Alexander the Great's mother was an Epirote, and Pyrrhus of Epirus, the king of Epirus in the 280s BCE, uh, was his second cousin and really wanted to revive. He wanted to be this great general, and out of all of the Diadochoi, or the successors of Alexander, he is a pretty good general. Um, Fought for the Macedonian throne a little bit, stuff like that. Uh, Nearly becomes king of Macedon at some points. But as Rome expands into southern Italy, Tarentum, as you can see right here, decides to attack a Roman garrison. This, of course, means Rome's going to retaliate. In order to protect themselves, they ask Pyrrhus for aid, and Pyrrhus is like, okay. He consults the Oracle of Delphi, who apparently gives him a good, yeah, you got this, buddy. Um, and so he crosses the Ionian Sea and rocks up into Tarentum. Uh, in 280 BCE, he defeats the Romans at the Battle of Heraclea, leading all of southern Italy to join Pyrrhus. At this point, he offers peace to the Romans, but the Romans aren't known for taking peace treaties. Um,
They're like, you had your chance.
yeah, you could have just left us alone, but here we are. Uh, because they're interesting people. Yeah. He moved into Campania, that rich area that the Romans were fighting the Samnites over. But he was thwarted in this and tried to move on Rome, but Rome is a very easily defended city. So he decides to move back in 279 BCE into Apulia, and we get the Battle of Asculum. Pyrrhus beats the Romans, however, he lost most of his best men, and this is where we get the famous statement, if we are victorious in one more battle with the Romans, we shall be utterly ruined. That brings us the idea of the Pyrrhic victory. A victory that's so costly that it's not really a victory at all, but you won the day.
Is this when the Romans started collecting slaves?
I mean, the Romans have been collecting slaves this whole time, but it's not really a massive uh, industry like it becomes later after the Second Punic War. But I mean, they've always had them. Um, in 278 BCE, an interesting thing happens. Carthage, who we'll learn about later, is trying to dominate the island of Sicily over there by the toe of the boot. Um, and there's Greek cities here too. The biggest one is Syracuse, and they've besieged the city of Syracuse. And the Greek cities in Sicily are like, "Can we get your help, Pyrrhus? The we'll give you a crown and call you the king of Sicily." And Pyrrhus is like, I'm not getting much out of this war with the Romans, so let's go into Sicily to fight the Carthaginians. And this goes much better. He lifts the siege of Syracuse, he receives the capitulation of most of the Carthaginian controlled cities, except for their major western Sicilian bases. Um, he tries to get peace with the Carthaginians, but the local Sicilian Greeks are like, no, we want this war over. So they fall through. He besieged the main Carthaginian stronghold on Sicily, and this is where his campaigns in Sicily start going awry. He needs more men. So he asks for more men from the Greek cities he's ostensibly protecting, but they don't like this and they say no. So Pyrrhus is like, "You're giving me those troops, whether you like it or not." Uh, they didn't like it.
I wonder why.
So he's forced to leave Sicily because he's lost all of the support of the Sicilian Greek, and so he decides one last shot at beating the Romans. So he invades Samnium. Um, the Romans and Pyrrhus meet at the Battle of Beneventum. It was indecisive, and Pyrrhus says, "Screw this, I'm leaving," and goes back to Epirus. At which point he'll try to conquer Greece, and I forget I think it's at the Battle of Argos. He gets killed by a woman throwing a brick at him because it seems that these people don't want Pyrrhus around. But yeah, he dies getting a brick thrown at him. Tarentum would eventually lose its independence in 272 BCE. And the Romans, not being big fans of Tarentum, decide to make a new port across the heel part of the boot on the other side of the heel from Tarentum. They start prioritizing this city called Brundisium, and Brundisium will become the major city in the area, and Tarentum loses most of its importance.
Mm.
So that's the Pyrrhic War. That's Rome's first real taste of fighting non-Italian.
Yes. So far, it's been they've kept it in the boot. And now they're getting their feet dirty,
Yeah,
metaphorically.
they're about, yeah. And soon they'll be heading into that little football that the boot is kicking.
Is it time?
Yes, to go to the next slide. So there are two main powers in the Mediterranean at this point, Rome and Carthage. Carthage is a Phoenician colony. Uh,
That I kind of, I guess by this point, Phoenicia proper is long gone, and they're their own thing now.
uh, yeah, it is a bit more complicated than that because the Persians, it there are documentaries on YouTube by this
Yeah.
channel called Invicta that can explain all that stuff a little bit more.
Yeah,
But
but basically, this is my limited knowledge of it. By this
yeah,
point, the Phoenicia capital was Tyre, right?
uh, uh Phoenicia was a bunch of city states, so there was
But,
no capital. But Carthage's mother city was Tyre.
and
Yes.
by this point, Alexander had made the bridge thing for the island and pretty much ravaged it, kind of.
Yeah,
So so its mother city is long gone by now, give or take.
yeah. And Carthage decides that it's going to conquer all of the other Phoenician colonies throughout the Western Mediterranean, and also decides that it wants to control Sicily.
But from what I heard, Karth is how that might be wrong, but Karth is like it's more of a trading empire than a military empire, give or take.
Yes, it likes using mercenaries rather than its own troops. It mostly, yeah, it's not it it focuses more on maritime stuff, though they will constantly fight with the Greeks in Sicily. But yeah. So in 289 BCE, a group of Italian mercenaries known as the Mamertines occupied the city of Messana, uh, which is the non-occupied part of Sicily on this map. Um, and they slaughtered all of the men and all of the non-virgins in the city and decided this is going to be our city now. Um, Syracuse, the green on this map, the biggest Greek city in Sicily, decides that uh, it gets decides to attack the Mamertines, and at this point, the Mamertines appeal to both Rome and Carthage for assistance. Of course, the Carthaginians are already on the island. They act first, and uh, the king of Syracuse, Hero II, is forced to back down, and Messana is saved. But while that's happening, debate is raging in the Roman Senate. Many don't want to aid the Mamertines as Rome had just dealt with mercenaries taking. No, it was it wasn't mercenaries. It was actual Roman legionaries that took over a city in southern Italy, and did what the Mamertines did, and the Romans decided, we don't like that, so we're gonna delete you guys from existence. But there was a vocal minority that saw this as a strategic and monetary advantage. One of them is Appius Claudius Caudex. By the way, his family, the Claudii, will eventually become emperors. So the
In
Claudii
a few
are,
in a few hundred
yeah,
years.
yep. Decided to appeal to the popular assembly, as there's a deadlock in the Senate. He enticed the popular assembly by saying there's going to be a lot of booty. Uh, and the popular assembly was like, "Oh, we can get rich for fighting these guys. Let's go!" And so Caudex is uh, appointed the leader of the expedition, given two legions. He crosses into, and the First Punic War begins. Next slide, because
Uh,
this will show a map of the actions that are about to occur on the island of Sicily. So Caudex crosses into Sicily and decides to besiege Syracuse, but nothing really ends up happening at this time. No decisive action occurs. So the next year, the Roman consuls went to Sicily with 40 1,000 men and besiege Syracuse again. This time, Syracuse capitulates and becomes a Roman ally and pays 100 talents of silver and agreed to supply the Roman armies in Sicily. So now the Romans have a base of operations on Sicily that they can operate out of and get supplies through. Syracuse will stay a Roman ally until well into the Second Punic War, and it's all because of this dude, Hero the Second. His successor kind of wasn't as big of a fan of the Romans, but that's later on.
How could no? How could anyone not like the Romans?
So the Carthaginians had chosen the Greek city of Acragas as their major city to be um, based out of. Acragas in Latin is called Agrigentum. So I'll be using Agrigentum instead of Acragas. Uh, the Carthaginians had naval supremacy, which hampered the Roman efforts. Um, the armies during this time had to go out and forage for their own food. We don't get armies being supplied their own food for centuries. Uh, so they just go around getting their own food. Um, During this time, the Carthaginians would sortie from the city, catching the Romans by surprise, but the Romans were able to beat back the sortie. A sortie is when, as you're being besieged, you leave the city to go attack the besiegers.
Okay, now, at this point, if I remember my history, this history is wrong again. Uh, Romans, until later, Rome at this point is still terrible at sea power.
Oh yeah, they're horrible at sea power. And we'll get a funny story a little bit later on. That ends up getting a dude named the nickname the Ass because of how bad they are at sea ship power. And to be honest, they never really get better. Uh, they get better at winning battles with ships, but they always rock up to storms and get their asses kicked by like Mother Nature. Uh, and it's just insane. We'll talk about that later. It's insane the manpower that Italy was able to uh, get together for this war. Like we'll talk about that later.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Carthage had assembled. Carthage is really bad at the beginning of this war because they assemble an army of 50,000 infantry, 6,000 cavalry, and 60 elephants to head to Sicily to relieve Acragas.
And these are all mercenaries, right? Paid soldiers.
Not all of them, but a lot of them. Uh, they do. The Carthaginians do use their own citizens, but there's not enough of them. So they supplement them with auxiliary troops from the Carthaginian Empire and mercenaries. So the cavalry in Carthage is usually made up of the Numidians, who are Berber people from just outside where the Carthaginians are at, stuff like that. Uh, um, at essentially the Carthaginian army that is. By the way, I'm not giving any names of Carthaginian commanders, unless they're a Barca, because no offense to the Carthaginians, the Romans were bad at naming because everybody has the same name, but at least some of them get an extra name at the end so that we know we're talking about a different person. The Carthaginians.
Sorry, real fast. I think we mentioned the Phoenicians before, but that's why this is called the Punic War and not the Carthaginian Wars.
Oh yeah, the Romans called the Carthaginians Poeni. So it's the Punic Wars. Uh, yeah, Carthage is just the city name. But yeah, uh, every Carthaginian commander's name is either Hanno, Mago, Hasdrubal, or Hannibal. So in order to keep as far away from confusion, I'm not mentioning any Carthaginian names unless they're a Barca, because then at least, they're a little more famous and a little bit more consequential to the story. Like, there were at least five Hannos in all of the Punic Wars, and at least five Hasdrubals. So I'm not doing it. I can't do it.
Yeah, I
You'll just
like I said, I know about the first war is one of the dad, like one of the guys was the dad, the guy from the second war.
uh yeah, Hasdrubal Barca ends up showing up a little bit later. This war goes on for like 20 years, so we've
Time.
got a long way to go. So this army that they had assembled just sat there for 2 months, not doing anything, just training, um, and allowed the Romans to just sit there and keep up the siege. And then he decides, you know what, let's attack now after 2 months. Well, turns out Carthaginians aren't very good at fighting battles on land, and they get absolutely trounced. And at this point, Agrigentum falls, and 25,000 of its inhabitants are sold into slavery.
Ooh, that ain't good.
No. Um, so the war kind of becomes a stalemate with a bunch of sieges of Carthaginian allied cities and Carthaginians besieging Roman allied cities, and skirmishes. There's no real goal or focus, so uh, at this point, every time the Romans tried to besiege a coastal Carthaginian city, the Carthaginians could just supply them by sea, and the Romans couldn't do anything about them. So the Romans decide that they are going to build a navy. The first Roman navy is made up of 120 ships and was dispatched in 260 BCE under the command of a guy named Gnaeus Cornelius Scipio.
Oh,
He
Scipio.
tried,
That's a name we'll hear about later. I think family name at least.
uh, yeah, the Scipios are a very, very illustrious family that keeps having powerful politicians. Yes. He tries to seize these islands to the north of Sicily called the Lipari Islands. Uh, but the Romans would get crushed and the entire navy would be destroyed. Uh, and Gnaeus Cornelius Scipio is able to get out of it, but he now forever is known as Gnaeus Cornelius Scipio Asina, the ass, for losing the battle. Uh, the new Roman, I guess you could say admiral, but they wouldn't really have called him an admiral, Gaius Duilius, decides, okay, so we're going to get our asses kicked in a conventional naval battle. So let's think we are great at land battles. What if we decide to put up a giant hook onto our ships that when we get close to the Carthaginian ships, we release this hook. It crashes down on the Carthaginian ship, and we can just walk across it and do our normal land battle stuff. And this is called the Corvus. And this new thing is able to defeat the Carthaginians at the Battle of Mylae in 260 BC. And now the Carthaginians are kind of on the back foot there, but at the same time, the Romans keep getting their navies destroyed in storms and stuff. So Rome's like, screw this. We're gonna invade Africa. So get they they get this becomes the largest naval battle in human history. 680 warships as the Carthaginians try to stop the invasion of Africa.
I was gonna say, and that's the only time the Europeans ever said, "Let's invade Africa."
Yeah. 680 warships and 290,000 men participate at the Battle of Ecnomus. The Romans would win the battle, the largest naval battle in human history, and they'd be allowed to land on Africa. Marcus Atilius Regulus was the commander of the army. Uh, the Carthaginians were really bad at battle still, and the Carthaginians were ready for peace. But the Romans overplayed their hand, so the Carthaginians refused the peace, and they hired a dude named Xanthippus. He's a Greek mercenary from a very famous city in Greece called Sparta. And what?
So I remember Sparta.
Yeah. He leads the Carthaginians in their battle against the Romans, and he does a much better job. He defeats the Romans. The Romans were able to evacuate their men, uh, but they were devastated by a storm. The reason they're devastated by storms constantly at this time is because of the Corvus. It makes the ships unwieldy, and we never hear about the Corvus ever again. And the Romans get a little bit better at fighting conventional naval battles to
It's
kind of.
always a storm.
Oh yeah, you just always a storm. The amount of Italians that drowned in the sea from storms is insane, and the fact that Rome was still able to send more ships was insane.
It's like I think 1,000 years later, or 1,500 years later, when the same thing happens to the Spanish during the invasion of England. The storm gets them more than the English does, I think.
Yeah. Marcus Atilius Regulus was actually captured, and he's tortured. No, he's not tortured yet. And he was told, give this peace to the Romans, and if they don't accept it, you have to come back to be tortured and killed. So he goes to the Senate and he tells them, do not accept these terms, and voluntarily returns to Carthage to be tortured and killed, kind of thing. So a little bit of a possible legend to say how great the the virtues of the Romans.
Yeah, either very virtuous, or he likes bondage very much.
Yeah. From now on, though, the Carthaginians are on the back foot. They don't really challenge.
Play a major part anymore.
Yeah. It's just Rome sieging down the cities, waiting for it all to end. They tried to raid Africa again in 253 BCE, but a storm destroyed 150 of their 220 ships. um, in 251 BCE, Carthage tries to go on the attack again, but is defeated by the Roman army.
Too little, too late.
Yeah. And we get back into another. We get into another stalemate. In 247 BCE, a dude named Hamilcar Barca is sent to the island of Sicily, and he's given very little forces. He can't really fight any major battles, so he fights a guerrilla war, or a war where you do hit and run tactics. But in 243 BCE, the Romans were sick and tired of it. So a bunch of the wealthiest Roman citizens got together to help beat to create a fleet, and finally, the Romans were able to defeat the Carthaginians fully, blockade Sicily completely, and in 241 BCE, the Carthaginians are forced to sue for peace, and the war is over with the treaty of Lutatius. Carthage evacuates Sicily, hands over all prisoners, and paid an indemnity of 3,200 talents over 10 years. Hamilcar Barca will become quite bitter over this, and a lot of that's actually there's an action later how that happens. But the First Punic War is finally over after 23 years of war. The Romans getting their asses beat by I think Poseidon is Neptune multiple times, but they still end up beating the Carthaginians and taking the island of Sicily.
And they never bothered with Carthage ever again.
Sure. Next slide. So, between two wars, the foreign mercenaries almost immediately rebel after the signing of the peace because they're not getting paid. Carthage has to pay Rome. You're not getting paid.
What
This
mercenaries don't like mercenaries want to make their money for fighting? I don't believe that at all.
Corsica and Sardinia rebel alongside the mercenaries. And when the Carthaginians move to take them back, Rome sees this as an act of war and forces Carthage to cede the islands and pay an additional 1,200 talents. This will cause a lot of resentment amongst the Carthaginians. But Hamilcar Barca is able to defeat the rebelling mercenaries. He knows that Carthage needs to rebuild its strength, so he goes off to Spain and decides to create essentially a Barcid fiefdom in
Hence the name Barcelona.
possibly that's a if I remember correctly, that's only a theory, but possibly.
Yes. But okay, not proven fact. This the hypothesis in history.
Yeah. They found a city called Carthago Nova, or New Carthage, which is funny because Carthage is already in Phoenician New City. So new city, new city. Well, no, it's new city, new city. But yes, he's able to conquer a bunch of Spain, and Spain is very rich in uh, in iron, and all these different resources. There's gold mines and stuff in Spain, stuff like that. I am very sorry that Maestro decided to fart. Uh, I hope it's not bugging you. So you see the red here on the map.
Yep.
Uh, there's a river at the top of this red bit called the Ebro River. In 226 BCE, Rome and Carthage sign a treaty specifying that river as a boundary between their spheres of influence. In 221 BCE, a dude named Hannibal Barca, the son of Hasdrubal, becomes the viceroy of Spain. Um, and while Carthage is doing all of this, Rome is expanding into Cisalpine Gaul.
So what is Spain called around this time? I know France is Gaul. What's Spain? Is Spain still Spain or what?
It's Hispania,
Okay.
at least to the Romans. I don't know what the Carthaginians called it. Uh, the Romans conquer Cisalpine Gaul and found two colonies there. Cisalpine Gaul is the northernmost bits of Italy, just to the south of the Alps. They found two colonies. This causes resentment amongst the Gauls, but they also ally with a city that is not in their sphere of influence, according to that treaty. It's called Saguntum. It's to the south of the Ebro, but it's allied to Rome. And this will eventually cause the issues that lead to the Second Punic War when Hannibal besieges and sacks Saguntum in 219 BCE. Rome sends an embassy to Carthage, essentially being like, "Give us Hannibal. He violated the treaty." Carthage is like, "Nah, you've treated us like shit too many times. We're fuck you." And so the Second Punic War begins. So Rome does most of the earliest moves, as well as some action that isn't related to the Second Punic War that are important for what happens in it. Uh, Early in the war, you get some skirmishes in Sicily, and Rome captures Malta. In Cisalpine Gaul, the Roman colonies were attacked, and there was a Roman force being sent into Spain that is now forced to be split into two. One to deal with the Gauls and one to head to Spain, causing this Spanish expedition to have to wait for new forces. There was also a Roman consul in Sicily, Tiberius Sempronius Longus, who was preparing to invade Italy. While this is happening, Hannibal is assembling his army at Carthago Nova, and in September, Hannibal is up by the city of Massilia, which is on this map. Uh, he's he's up by the city of Massilia and crossing the Rhone River in southern France. However, the Roman army that was going to be sent to Spain arrives in Massilia soon after, and he's forced to cross the Alps instead. of going through the much easier coastal route.
Ah, so this wasn't a planned thing.
Mm-mm. He faces a lot of local resistance and climate issues, but over 15 days, uh, Hannibal is able to cross the Alps and arrives in Cisalpine Gaul, surprising the Romans. The Romans are surprised by this. They weren't expecting this.
So why is this still remembered years later as some big thing?
It's a massive feat of just like he's crossing in the autumn. He's crossing in the autumn. He has to fight local Gauls who try to kill him. He loses a bunch of men. People, they're cold, they're sick, they're tired, they're hungry, and he ends up making it anyway.
I wonder what would happen if I heard only one elephant survived the crossing. If they all, if more than one or all of them, all the elephants survived.
Uh, I don't know. Oh my god.
Well, that's plenty of food for a while if you're like elephant meat, I guess.
Yeah. Um. Uh,
While we're waiting for him to return,
sorry about that. So the Romans are forced to scramble. They weren't expecting Hannibal to be able to cross the Alps. Um, and this will lead to some problems. Next
yeah,
slide.
I heard this is this plus. I think this is the first. This is the last time they'll be invaded in their home soil until the Goths.
Uh,
It's years later, I think.
no.
Oh,
Italy gets invaded just 100 years later.
okay.
Uh, but that's for next episode.
Okay. I'm I learn something new every day.
But yeah, next slide. So the Romans forces in the area, led by a guy named Publius Cornelius Scipio, the father of a famous guy, uh, um, fought the Carthaginians at the Battle of the Ticinus. He's wounded, and the Gallic tribes declare for Hannibal. Um, and now Hannibal's replaced most of his losses from the crossing of the Alps. This forces Sempronius Longus to head north. Sempronius Longus is a bit of a hothead, and Hannibal is able to bait him into a battle that is favorable to the Carthaginians at the Battle of the Trebia. Essentially, the Carthaginians attack the Roman camp. The Romans sally out. They cross the cold river, make it onto the other side, but at this point they're surrounded by the Carthaginians, and only 10,000 of the 40,000 Romans make it out alive. Uh, Sempronius Longus is one of them. And Sempronius Longus is one of them, and he's able to oversee the elections. But Hannibal now has a base of operations in northern Italy.
Now, according to this, Rome don't have a cavalry of their own.
Uh, Romans are bad at cavalry. Yeah. And their cavalry was defeated at the Battle of the Ticinus. earlier on, but
Well,
yeah.
I guess since Italy's a more mountainous area, horse horse thing isn't that good for fighting probably.
Yeah. Um, Possibly. I'm not sure on that.
All right.
The Romans just, I mean, the Romans were on that flat plain. They just weren't good at cavalry because their cavalry was usually a bunch of rich, pompous aristocrats. But yeah, uh, they have big cavalry problems at the beginning of the war.
Okay.
Nicolas.
Real fast. That at the bottom, is that what the future mammal thing is named after?
Huh?
It says placenta. Placentia.
No, no, that's the modern. No, that's the modern Italian city of Piacenza.
I thought okay. I thought that's what that biblical quote was named after later.
No. Nicolas. So the new Roman consuls decide that they are going to try to block Hannibal's movements. There's this big mountain range that you have to cross uh, if you want to get into southern Italy and the Roman region, the Apennines. There's two major cities in one in Tuscany, Arretium on the left. It's not connected to this road, but this is the only map I could find that showed both Arretium and Ariminum, because Arretium is where one of the consuls sets up, and Ariminum is where the other one sets up. So trying to block both ways for Hannibal to get into southern Italy unless he crosses the Apennines. Hannibal crosses the Apennines and fools the Romans uh,
Yes.
because he decides to take a difficult route. It was unguarded, but it was difficult. I'm pretty sure during this time he loses an eye, and I think the last elephant dies.
Uh, so
Um,
they're like, he'll never do that. Oh my god, he did it.
he then crosses into modern day Tuscany. At the time, it's called Etruria, the land of the Etruscans. And the land of the Etruscans. And he starts ravaging the area um, in order to get the consul Gaius Flamininus to leave Arretium and move into an open battle, which will lead to the at the time biggest disaster in Roman military history. That's the next slide.
Now fast. I love it. Now, is it true that this time the Roman generals only fought 1 year, like pretty much 1 year at a time? And they got
Uh,
new general.
you can be appointed to fight longer, but the consuls are only every 1 year, and the consuls normally lead most of the armies. But that's Rome's now an empire. It's not really as important anymore,
Okay.
kind of thing. So Hannibal is able to uh, bait Flamininus into coming into this. You see these hills up here, the forested hills, and for, he sets up his camp at the end of this little road here at Lake Trasimene, uh, making it seem like that's where the Romans are. So I mean, not the Romans, the Carthaginians are. So the Romans push in to go fight the camp, but he's hidden a bunch of men in the hills. At which point, when the Romans get in there, he attacks, and the entire Roman force is destroyed or captured. 15,000 Romans including Gaius Flamininus, were killed. 10,000 were captured. Um, the Romans of these captured are treated terribly. However, if you were a Roman ally, Hannibal released you to go back to your city because he's trying to persuade. His main strategy in doing all of this is to invade Italy, and he wants to live off the land while destroying Roman armies. So he needs allies. He's trying to persuade. He's trying to persuade the Italian allies to switch to his side. So he's merciful to the Italian allies. After Trasimene, the Romans are panicking. Of course, this this is an unprecedented thing. They've lost multiple times. The consul is dead. Um,
They finally found someone that fights on their level.
yeah. So they elect a dictator for a 6-month period, Quintus Fabius Maximus, who adopts a new strategy. Next slide. Quintus Fabius Maximus essentially decides to avoid all pitched battles. That's what Hannibal wants. He wants pitched battles. Hannibal cannot win a battle of attrition. He wants to destroy the Roman army because and resupply his forces as much as possible from local Italians. Um, so Fabius denies this and decides to harass the Carthaginians instead, as the Carthaginians start moving towards the Greek cities of southern Italy, where he knows he'll get some support and possibly have the ability to get Carthaginian reinforcements.
So this is more now that they're more like guerrilla warfare or hiding or like in the shadows instead of out front fighting.
Yeah, skirmishes when the Carthaginians are trying to get food and stuff like that. However, the Romans aren't big fans of this.
The honorable fighters, they still are, I guess.
Mhm. So when Fabius's term ends in 216 BCE, two new consuls are elected: Gaius Terentius Varro and Lucius Aemilius Paulus. Varro wanted to crush the Carthaginians with overwhelming force, while Aemilius Paulus was more of a centrist on the issue. Uh, but Varro sort of gets his way and raises an army of 86,000 men to meet Hannibal for the next slide's battle. One of the most famous battles in human history is about to happen. The Battle of Cannae. The 86,000 Romans rock up to the Carthaginians to fight. Hannibal weakens his center while strengthening his flanks. So as the Romans, and of course you've got this really shitty Roman cavalry that gets beaten by the Carthaginians immediately. But during this time, you always have this: is the cavalry actually going to come back, or are they going to just enjoy themselves raiding the encampment? So you need a really good generalship to ensure that the cavalry returns to battle and isn't off chasing off, trying to gain as much glory as possible. Uh, so because he weakened the center, Hannibal's center falls back. However, the flanks are strong. They hold. The Romans, however, see this as we're about to break through the center and then we'll deal with the flanks eventually. So they keep pushing more and more men into the center.
Mhm.
And eventually you get this semicircle shape where a bunch of Romans are kind of trapped in here. And then the cavalry returns and the Romans are trapped. 67,500 Romans are killed or captured.
What's this formation called again?
Oh, what are you talking about?
That they just did the formation that I guess they later, people that they the flank, they surround you, they think you're dead, but then you get surrounded instead of pushing through.
I
I thought was a name for it.
mm, I don't know of any name for it.
But all I know is after this it's used a lot of times. It's famous battle. It's a famous thing in history, in military history.
Yeah. I know you get. I know flanking is really important in battle because if you're fighting uh fighting head to head is always going to be a long stalemate. But if you get the formation from behind, you can cause troops to panic. So you get a lot of flanking happening because that's how you win, kind of thing. Yeah, 67,500 Romans are killed or captured. The survivors of Cannae have to live years of just being forced to live in the countryside as they're seen as cowards, and uh, Rome won't let them back in because they fled the battle, kind of thing. Stuff like that. And it gets even worse. Only a couple weeks after this, the Boii, a Gallic tribe, annihilates an army of 25,000 Romans. So southern Italy starts defecting to Hannibal, including the city of Capua, who thinks that they um can become the preeminent city in Italy now.
The pincer movement.
I wouldn't really call this a pincer movement, but
Maybe.
the pincer movement isn't about deliberately weakening the center. A pincer movement is about fixing a force and then attacking from the flank or rear. That's not
Oh,
deliberately weakening the center.
I thought that's what they were doing, surrounding the people.
Yeah, but Hannibal deliberately weakens the center to force the as many Romans in as possible.
All right.
It's kind of a unique strategy to the pincer movement. But yeah, um, Carthage. So next slide actually. Hannibal doesn't move on Rome at this point. He's too busy trying to get allies in the south, and he does get allies in the south. And at this point in 215 BCE, Carthage sends its only reinforcements to Hannibal because Carthage is trying to fight multiple fronts, kind of thing. But also, it's hard to get men to Hannibal because he's kind of isolated over there.
Yeah.
Uh, So southern Italy mostly defects to Hannibal's side at this point, but they aren't really able to contribute new troops, and it now means that Hannibal has to defend a lot of territory. So you start getting this whack-a-mole kind of thing where Roman armies would come up to take territory. Hannibal's able to deal with the Roman army over here, but he's not able to deal with the Roman army over there that does something that's beneficial to the Romans. And the Romans have started this Fabian strategy thing up more and more as throwing throwing a bunch of men into meat grinders that kill them all isn't working. So, yeah. And while Hannibal is only one army, forced to move around as one army, the Romans are able to uh, make multiple different armies that can move a lot more flexibly, making this whack-a-mole kind of thing. Hannibal can't fully defeat the Romans, and the Romans just come in where Hannibal's not and uh, does something good. For example, in 212 what- for example, the Samnites were sending troops to Hannibal, but they would be intercepted and defeated at the Battle of Beneventum. Um, by 212 BCE, the Romans had raised 22 legions of 20,000 men each. That's an insane amount of men. Italy is able to raise a lot of men and keep throwing them into battle while Hannibal cannot match this. Meanwhile, in the east, uh, next slide. So in 215 BCE, Philip V of Macedon, the king of Macedon, pledges his support to Hannibal and initiates the First Macedonian War. Um, the Romans were afraid that the Macedonians would invade Italy, but they were unable to. And Rome would ally with the Aetolian League, which is on this map. Um, it's one of these. It's one of these things. They'd ally with the Aetolian League, which would keep Macedon busy for the entirety of the war. So no real major engagements between Rome and Macedon happened, and in 205 BCE, the First Macedonian War ends.
But I'm pretty sure they will remember that they side with their enemies for future reference.
Uh, Kinda, yeah.
Yeah, I remember when you sided with Carthage against us. Yeah, that wasn't a good move, guys.
Um, Also in 215 BCE, things get a little bit worse for Rome in the next slide.
So I guess this went two wars happening at the same time. Macedonia and the Punic wars were happening simultaneously.
Yeah. So in 215 BCE, Hero II that we talked about during the First Punic War dies. Um, his successor Hieronymus decided to betray Rome and join Hannibal, and Hannibal is promised the whole of Sicily in this. Um, the Syracusans, however, could not defeat the Romans, and the Romans were able to crush their army and besiege Syracuse by 213 BCE. A Carthaginian army was sent to relieve the city, however, it was unable to. And in 212 BCE, uh, yeah, Syracuse would fall. Uh, Famously, the Syracusan inventor Archimedes invented a bunch of cool things to fight the Romans, including the Dial of Destiny that brings a bunch of Nazis back from the present day, and a dude named Indiana Jones, but for some reason, uh, uh, Indiana Jones gets punched by his goddaughter and gets sent back to modern day. So yeah, that happened. That really happened. I saw it on a movie screen. It happened.
Yeah, and I just like I read a book where Archimedes made a whole spear that controlled any gadget ever in the Percy Jackson series. That totally happened
Yeah,
too.
yeah. Archimedes is uh killed after he tells a Roman soldier to get off his uh get off of his thing. He was making a thing and the Roman stepped on it and he was like, "Get the fuck out of here!" And the Roman was like, "Okay, I stab you." But yeah, Syracuse loses its independence. All it had to do was not ally against Rome, and it could have survived. But no, it decides that it's going to fight Rome instead.
I'm sure it all worked out for him in the end because of that decision.
It did not. Next,
Spoilers.
next slide. In 207 BCE, Hasdrubal Barca, the brother of Hannibal, marched across the Alps and invaded Cisalpine Gaul with 35,000 men. The goal was to link up with Hannibal so that Hannibal wouldn't have such a tough time with this whack-a-mole thing. He'd now have a couple more armies. However, the uh, the Romans are able to trick Hannibal into letting a large portion of the Roman army leave under a man named Claudius Nero. Yes, Claudius Nero. Um, and Nero heads north and defeats the Carthaginians at the Battle of Metaurus. Hasdrubal dies. The army is destroyed. This is the last. This isn't the last time a Barca tries to reach Hannibal, but it was the last great hope of Hannibal to possibly win this war in Italy. The next time it may go all lands in Cisalpine Gaul from the sea, but he's also defeated. Uh, and Hannibal will eventually have to leave Rome, but we've got to talk about something else.
Meanwhile,
Meanwhile, the son of Publius Cornelius Scipio, who was uh, injured at the Battle of the Ticinus, uh, is able to convince the Romans to send him off to Iberia.
yeah, it's like we're not having a good time beating these guys on our own territory. Let's go to their territory and invade it.
Yeah. In 209 BCE, uh, BCE before Common Era. Yeah. Um, in 209 BCE, Scipio was able to seize Carthago Nova and gain a vast amount of gold, silver, and siege artillery. However, he wasn't able to stop Hasdrubal Barca from going off to Italy, but it's okay because Nero stopped them. Not the bad Nero. This is a good Nero. But yeah. In 206 BCE, Scipio would defeat a massive Carthaginian army of 54,500 men and 32 elephants at the Battle of Alyppa. At which point, the Romans conquered Carthaginian Spain. Meanwhile, in Africa, the Numidian king Syphax declares for Rome in 213 BCE. However, the Carthaginians are able to squash him quite easily and creates and starts divvying out territories to pro-Carthaginian Numidians, as the Numidian cavalry are really, really important to the ability of the Carthaginian army to work. This, however, disinherits a Numidian called Massinissa, who goes to the Romans with some of his, who would declare for Rome with a bunch of his troops. So in 204 BCE, this Scipio fellow invades Africa and joins Massinissa. Massinissa would become a major ally of Rome from now on in his united Numidian kingdom.
Hence the guy's name.
Uh, yes, Africanus, but we next slide, because this is the culminating battle of the Second Punic War. In 202 BCE, Hannibal, who has come back to Africa in order to uh, deal with this, comes up to fight the Romans at the Battle of Zama. Hannibal had 80 elephants, and he tried to send them um, against the Romans. However, the Romans uh, were able to scare the elephants and send the elephants back into the Carthaginian formations. The
And
Romans then, hmm,
say, and they did the Hannibal what the Hannibal did them years before, circling him around.
yeah, because now the Numidians are on the Roman side. These masterful cavalry are able to defeat the less good Carthaginian normal cavalry, and they come back, hit the Carthaginians in the rear, and the Second Punic War is finally over. Uh, Rome strips Carthage of most of its territory. They're forced to pay 10,000 talents of silver. They're forbidden from possessing war elephants or having a fleet of over 10 warships. And Hannibal is forced to flee Carthage, and he heads eastward. Uh, and Carthage is really broken at this point. So Rome now has to go fight some other people.
Remember look who's back.
Yeah. So
I
here
guess
we're going.
I say, I guess now that not doing now that done the kind of thing, and they're like, hey, I remember you guys. Remember now they put their full focus on these guys.
So now we're going to get into a little bit of Roman politics at first. So there were two Roman factions. One was led by Scipio Africanus. Uh, Scipio Africanus was a Hellenophile. He liked the Greeks, and the Hellenophiles want to intervene in Greece to quote unquote free the Greeks from the Macedonians, as the Macedonians are trying to assert their dominance over the Greeks at this time. Uh, then you've got the people that really do not like the Greeks, see the Greek as degenerates, see Greek culture as ruining Roman culture and advocating for going back to a more traditional Roman value led by a dude named Cato the Elder. Uh, this will lead to uh, this will lead to some strife over how to deal with the East and everything. Um, Philip V of Macedon's trying to move into Anatolia, modern day Turkey, um, and dealing with the kingdom of Pergamon and Rhodes. Uh, and uh, these kingdoms would call for Roman aid. a consul named Publius Sulpicius Galba, an ancestor of a Roman emperor from later on in 200 BCE, would take this issue to the Comitia Centuriata. However, it was unanimously rejected. People were tired of war. Um, they just dealt with losing a bunch of men over the last 16 years, but Galba is able to persuade them to go to war in the Second Macedonian War. This war would end at the Battle of Kainos Kephale, in which the more flexible Roman formations are able to defeat the more rigid Macedonian phalanxes. And in the peace treaty, Philip V of Macedon is forced to leave Thrace, leave Asia Minor, and leave Greece. At which point, the guy who led the Romans at Kainos Kephale, uh, Titus Quinctius Flamininus, declared that the Greeks are now free because he's a Hellenophile, and he's like, I've just done a great thing, yes. This,
Boy.
this breaks Macedonian power forever. The Macedonians will come back for two more wars with the Romans, but they'll get their asses kicked. But another of the successor states that you can see on this map, the Seleucids, are about to enter the stage.
Who?
The Seleucids.
Okay. Okay. I thought you said the way you said it first time didn't sound like probably said the proper name. Right.
The next slide. A Cold War sort of develops between the Romans and the Seleucids. The Seleucids, of course, saw Anatolia, all of these territories that had been lost to them earlier on in the Seleucid Empire, as their
now real fast. The Seleucids are what are like the former Persian area of Alexander's empire.
Yeah. Yeah. And they saw Anatolia as theirs because they won it essentially during the Diadochoi Wars, but then they lost it. So yeah. But of course, the Seleucids saw this their um, as their as a core part of their empire, and Greece would be the buffer between the Roman Empire and the Seleucid Empire. However, the Romans saw Greece as theirs and Asia Minor, or Anatolia or Turkey, as the buffer between the two. Of course, this isn't going to end well, as they have competing claims here, and the Seleucid king Antiochus the Great would be drawn into Greece when the Aetolian League, the people who had helped Rome in the First Macedonian War, um, uh, sparked a war between Rome and the Seleucids and sided with the Seleucids. Antiochus would invade Thessaly, but most of the Greeks, actually liked what the Romans had done in the Second Macedonian War. And so we're like, can you leave? We don't want you guys here. The Romans freed us, leading to the Romans defeating the Seleucids at the Battle of Thermopylae. Yes. that same place that quote unquote 300 Spartans died fighting the Persians, because it was more than 300 Spartans. But yeah,
Plus their allies and their slaves and all that.
yeah, it wasn't even 300 Spartans at the end. There were Thebans and Thespians that decided to stay with them. Nah. So this Scipio Africanus at this point joins this war with his brother for one last great conquest and defeats the Seleucids at the Battle of Magnesia in 190 BCE.
And then
And
he's
this was
renamed Scipio Turcius.
no, he's still Scipio Africanus. But yeah. Uh but um yeah. So this solidifies the independence of Pergamon, and Pergamon will be so grateful for this that the kings of Pergamon will eventually, when they don't have any more heirs, bestow their kingdom upon the Romans. And the Romans will gain the kingdom of Pergamon as a new province. But yeah.
Nice.
The next slide. The son of Philip V was not content with being just in Macedonia and wanted to force the Romans out of Greece. His name was Perseus, or Perseus, if I didn't say that already. And this would lead to the Third Macedonian War. He'd be defeated at the Battle of Pydna by a dude who is important, Lucius Aemilius Paulus Macedonicus. He's going to be the birth father of an important figure in the Third Punic War and for later Roman politics. With this defeat, Macedon is divided into 4 Roman client republics. The Macedonians do come back later to try to fight in the Fourth Macedonian War under a dude who claims that he was either Perseus or the son of Perseus. They try to win the Fourth Macedonian War. They don't. Rome annexes Macedonia.
Like Perseus, like the famous hero, Medusa Perseus thing.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure that's way off in the timeline of mythology.
Yeah. So next and final slide.
Let's do Carthage one more time.
So now that the Greek question's kind of been decided, 2 new factions form in Rome. One led by the same guy who thought that the Greeks were a bunch of degenerates, Cato the Elder. By the way, Cato the Elder was a big fan of being a farmer. I forgot what. Yeah, he thought farming cabbages was great, and that cabbages could heal you of anything. It lasted a while, 168 to third Macedonian War. Oh yeah, I don't have any internet on my computer. Sorry, I can't look that up. I should have put that in there. My bad. So Cato the Elder, Mr. Cabbage Lover, led the faction that wanted Carthage to be destroyed. He famously would end all of his speeches with Carthago delenda est, or Carthage must be destroyed. The other faction was led by a man named Scipio Nasica, who's from a different branch of the Scipio family that got an extra cognomen so that they could be uh, distinguished from the other Scipios because there's a bunch of Scipios running around. Nasica means large nosed, so he's nosy. He's got a big nose. Him and his faction believed Carthage was necessary to avoid social division, as it's this big threat that the Romans can fearmonger.
Shenanigans, like those things where, hey, instead of fighting each other, or instead of local populations fighting each other, we have a common enemy over here, Carthage.
Yeah, exactly. Uh, Carthage had started rebounding um, after fully paying off its debts and started becoming a commercial empire again. This possibly threatened the Romans, and there's a lot of theories about why this war started, stuff like that. Essentially, the Carthaginians could not declare war without Roman approval. And as Carthage becomes more,
Sorry. I think that's it's. I declare war on you guys. No, we won't allow it.
yeah, so they weren't allowed to declare war without Roman permission as part of the treaty that ended. Oh shit! I forgot all about this. During the Roman Seleucid War earlier, Hannibal fought with the Seleucids, and part of the treaty was that he was given up to the Romans, and Hannibal kills himself. Antiochus was a dumbass and put Hannibal as a admiral instead of a general. Sorry, I forgot all about that. Whoops. um.
No mistakes allowed.
So Carthage is becoming prosperous again. They can't declare war on anybody. There's a Roman allied kingdom to the west called Numidia, led by the same Massinissa that fought during the Second Punic War. He's like, oh my god, this is perfect. I can go in, take all their stuff, and they can't do anything about it. So he starts doing that. Of course, this makes the Carthaginians mad. The Carthaginians raise an army to go fight the Numidians, and the Romans are like, you can't do that. And the Carthaginians are like, what do you want us to do? And they're like, just submit to the Numidians. And this sparks the war. The campaign would the final campaign would be led by a man named Scipio Aemilianus. Scipio Aemilianus was the son of Lucius Aemilius Paulus Macedonicus, but he was adopted by the son of Scipio Africanus, Publius Cornelius Scipio. In Roman naming conventions and familial ties kind of things. When you are adopted by somebody, you essentially are a birthright son of that person. In the eyes of the Romans, you are now a Scipio. So his name was changed to, I think, Lucius Cornelius Scipio, but you'd get a extra little cognomen that said what your former family name was, but with a different ending because of Latin Latin grammar. So now he's Lucius Cornelius Scipio Aemilianus. I'm pretty sure it was because Publius Cornelius Scipio had no sons, so he adopts Scipio Aemilianus. Extremely common. You get it later on. The first emperor of Rome was adopted by Julius Caesar. We don't fully know what his original surname was, but his praenomen and cognomen was Gaius wait, no. We don't know what his original cognomen was. We know what his family name was. It was Gaius Octavius. It was possibly Gaius Octavius Thurinus. When he was adopted by Julius Caesar, he changes his name to Gaius Julius Caesar Octavianus.
Wasn't he like his sister's kid or something?
Yeah, he was Caesar's nephew, but Caesar never had any sons. Well, he had the son with Cleopatra, but um, he's a foreigner, so
But
we can't.
no legitimate Roman kids.
Yeah, so he this happens whenever somebody doesn't have any kids, so he decides that he's going to adopt somebody to continue the family line. And it's not seen as if you're giving it off to another family. It's seen as this person from another family has now become part of your family and is not part of the old family. Um, but
That's,
Scipio Emil
yeah.
but Scipio Aemilianus leads the final bit of the siege of Carthage. Um, they were able to breach the walls around the harbor of Carthage, and fighting within the city lasted for 6 days. There's a legendary thing that the commander of the Carthaginians tried to save himself and his family, but his wife, he's able to save himself, but his wife says, "You're a coward, screw you," and decides to die with her children with Carthage, and he ends up living in an estate somewhere. No, no, the Romans did not sow the fields of Carthage with salt. That did not happen. It was probably a myth developed in the 19th century. It did not happen. But they did lay curses on the city so that nobody would live there. And 50,000 Carthaginians were sold into slavery. At the same time, there was also a war in Greece called the Achaean War. Um, and the Romans would do to a city called Corinth the same they did to Carthage, and Greece lost its freedom to Rome. So now Rome is the undisputed master of the Mediterranean.
Except for a little area called Egypt for now.
Yeah, and they haven't expanded into the Eastern Mediterranean. They do have they have allies over there, but they haven't expanded there yet. But there's no real there's nobody else to really fight them like at this point. They control everything. Uh, and it seems like Scipio Nasica was probably right that Carthage was the only thing keeping Rome together. Dun dun dun. Foreshadowing for the next episode.
Yep, because next month we're going to talk about how I guess republics can't really stand the empires.
Yeah. Just yeah. Bad things happen.
Yeah, like hey, you know this luck thing we're having? Yeah, we'll stop. It's bad. But anyways, anything? I don't think you don't think on your channel you want to advertise because you really don't do stuff on your channel, do you?
Nope.
But for me, in 2 weeks from now, me and my friends will be reviewing the Friday the 13th franchise on Saturday the 14th.
Cool.
one day late, but And then the week after that, we will be talking about the precursor to the Constitution, the Articles of Confederation, and how they worked out great for the United States.
Horrible. They were
And a little
horrible.
bit, and a little bit about how, I guess also a little bit about how the state federal battle is still going on today that started back then. And then 3 weeks or 4 weeks, we'll be back here to talk about the fall of the Republic of the Roman people.
No, no. We're not gonna talk about the fall of the Republic
Oh,
quite yet. We're just gonna look at it starting to fray a little bit at the
oh,
edges.
so we're not even getting close to Julius Caesar at time then.
No, no. The fall of the Republic, in my opinion, is gonna be 2 episodes. Yeah. So my plan was fraying of the Republic, then we go into the lead up to the Civil Wars, then the Civil Wars.
So that's a trilogy almost.
Yeah, because a lot of stuff is happening. I can't fit that all into one episode.
Let's make it let's make it like 10 hours.
Yeah.
All right. Well, be sure to be there in a month from now. But until then, never stop learning. Enjoy the randomness. We'll see y'all next time.